The machine was still running. No one had shut it off. The machine he later came to know intimately. The Hadley-Watson Model 6 Speed Ironer and Folder. A long and clumsy name. The people who worked here in the steam and the wet had a better name for it. The Mangler. Hello and welcome to another one of our dives into the Stephen King universe. This time with a short story called, well, you might already guess from the opening, The Mangler. And that is a short story which first appeared in Cavalier magazine in December 1972 and was published in Night Shift, which you might guess from my videos I am reading or rereading for the umpteenth time at the minute. And of course this video will contain spoilers. You have been warned. So without further waffling from me, we'll get right into it. Now the story begins with Officer Hunton having to go to the Blue Ribbon Laundry because somebody has had an industrial accident there and he is there just to investigate. But the thing that strikes him as odd is that people, humans especially, usually gather around the scene of an accident because we love blood, guts and gore, and you can't help but look even though you should really look away. But he finds that all the people are crammed into the office and are absolutely nowhere near the accident site. They won't even go anywhere near it. And of course that gets these little synapses firing because it's odd. And what has happened is this Hadley-Watson Model 6 Speed Ironer and Folder is like 30 foot long, cast iron, and it's where sheets are put in. They go over and under 8 big steel cylinders to flatten out any creases. So it comes out, it gets all folded and comes out the other end looking perfect. And the industrial accident is that a woman worker by the name of Mrs. Frawley has been sucked into this machine and crushed. And he later tells his friend Mark Jackson when he's over at his house after dinner that it tried to fold her. It's just red everywhere. They had to carry bits of her out in a wicker basket, is how it's described. Which, just imagine that for a minute. Just, ugh. But, oh, so grim. Now, of course, because it's an industrial accident, there has to be a coroner's inquest. And the inquest finds that there is absolutely nothing wrong with the machine. And especially nothing wrong with the safety bar where she was working, which should have prevented her being sucked in. It is in perfect working order, and they've had 6 different inspectors look at this thing. And it works perfectly. Not one little glitch on it. And Hunton corners one of these inspectors, a guy called Roger Martin, after the inquest finds that it's death by misadventure. That's one hell of a misadventure. And he corners him and asks, how the hell have you come to this conclusion? She got sucked into this machine and you're saying that it's in perfect working order? And Roger gives him an explanation both on the books, which is they've found absolutely nothing wrong with it, it's in perfect working order, she must have tried to force her hand in there and got sucked in anyway. And he gives him an explanation off the books, which is he tells him a story of a different piece of machinery that he'd heard of, which is a fridge that was in somebody's yard, and a dog went missing. It was found in the fridge door had closed on it, and the dog had suffocated. And the guy whose yard it was had taken it to the town dump under order and left it there. But in the meantime, things were being found in this fridge. And just when the dump inspector was going to take the door off it, he opened it and found a child inside. Just as he was opening the door and had his hand in the rim of it, the door closed on his hand. And he says that the Mangler reminds him of that fridge. Which is a nice note because a few years on, when writing it, a fridge like that makes it into the story, and I think it has to do, if I remember rightly, that is where the character of Patrick Hockstetter meets his demise, in this fridge in the dump. So that's a nice sort of connection. Most of King's works are sort of interconnected in some way, and so is this one, a lot more than that one that I've just pointed out there. But he tells him the story of this fridge and says that when they were inspecting it, if he had found even a speck of dust in the wrong place on it, he would have ordered it shut down. He says it's a spook. It's a uneasy. The machine gives off uneasy vibes. He really, really didn't like it. But of course you can't write that in a report, especially an inquest report, but you'd be laughed out of your work. Now later on that night, he is again at Jackson's house. Now Jackson is a English lit college professor type. And this is where the first question comes up, that Mark asks him, do you think it's haunted? Sort of half joking, half not. And he says, oh, well, you must not have heard that there's another something happened with that machine that day. One of the steam lines that carry this, like, I don't know, over 300 degrees of steam heat, has snapped loose and burned 3 of the women working on this machine. And all 3 of them have ended up in hospital. Of course, Hunton, being a cop, has to, go to the hospital, and he asks one of them, Mrs. Gillian, he asks her unofficially about the Mangler. And she tells him the story that this machine was perfectly fine. None of this used to happen to it until, I think, a few weeks prior. There's a young lass called Sherry who was working on the machine, and she cut her finger on it, moving one of the clamps. And it was after this that things started to go wrong on it. Bolts started falling off, things started it began to have a weird vibe around it. And only the week after Sherry had cut herself and bled on it, that was when this woman had got pulled into the machine and mangled. And she says it's as if the machine had tasted blood and found it liked it. Don't women get funny ideas sometimes? I hate that. Now, a few days later, Hunton again meets with Jackson. They're very, very good friends. And he tells him this development of what she said in the hospital. And Jackson asks again, but serious this time, do you think the machine is haunted? And Jackson tells him that the machine scares the hell out of him and he has never even seen it. Which, hearing all these stories about it, why would you want to go see it, really? You wouldn't want to go within 30 feet of it. And Jackson brings up the theory of the machine being possessed, which is probably his overactive imagination, and he wants to play at this type of stuff. And he says that he's been reading a lot of books. He cancelled his classes and read a lot of books about this thing. And he's whittled it down to a few common denominators to find out what kind of possession it actually is. Common denominators being the blood of a virgin, of course, graveyard dirt, the hand of glory, which could be the actual hand of a dead man, or one of the hallucinogenics such as belladonna. Now Hunton, probably because he's a cop, is extremely sceptical about this, and you're just being fanciful, you're trying to make it into something it's not, you just got an overactive imagination. He asks how the hell could it had to have one hell of a coincidence for all of those things to get into that Mangler in that space of time. It's just not possible. And then it cuts away to being in the Blue Ribbon Laundry, and the foreman, George Stanner, loses his arm in it. It pulls him in. And if the maintenance guy hadn't been there and had to chop off his arm with an axe, because he's pressing the buttons on the machine, it's not stopping, he has to do it with an axe so that it doesn't pull him all the way in. And as soon as George is free from the machine, the machine shuts down. Now, Hunton isn't assigned to any of this. He only finds out because the state inspector that he was talking to at the inquest, Roger Martin, rings him and tells him about it. And Hunton is with Jackson and he looks at him and says, all right, let's just go see the girl. Let's go see Sherry and find out if she's a virgin. Which you can imagine how well that conversation goes. Although it does go kind of all right. Of course, because what kind of story would it be? This girl that cut her finger, Sherry, is a virgin. So the blood of a virgin is in there. And when Hunton and Jackson meet again that evening after going to see Sherry, they don't know really what to do. They don't know what kind of demon has possessed it. If the incantation had been deliberately cast, then they would know exactly which kind of demon they would be facing and which rite of exorcism to perform to get it out. Now, Jackson has been reading these kind of occult books all day and seems extremely confident that he knows which kind of demon is in this machine. And he completely and confidently rules out the Hand of Glory ever being involved because nobody else has died in it and there's no belladonna growing anywhere near them in the state. So that is completely ruled out confidently. And he finally settles that it must be a minor demon that is in the Mangler. And they are relatively easy to get out. All you need is holy water and a Bible. And he says it's a type of voodoo. You don't mess with voodoo. And it should be relatively easy to get it out. And he does mention that he is very, very glad that there is no Hand of Glory even anywhere near this or involved anywhere near it. Because that would be very, very bad juju. It's actually what it says. And if they went up against a demon that had all of those things and the Hand of Glory with just holy water and a Bible, then they're pretty much screwed. Because a demon like that would drink holy water and shit Bible verses just for breakfast. Now I'll read this bit of it because it's my favourite part of this book. Adele Frawley was dead, sewed together by a patient undertaker. She lay in her coffin. Yet something of her spirit perhaps remained in the machine, and if it did, it cried out. She would have known, could have warned them. She had been prone to indigestion, and for this common ailment she had taken a common stomach tablet called Easy Gel, purchasable over the counter of any drugstore for 79 cents. The side panel holds a printed warning. People with glaucoma must not take Easy Gel, because the active ingredient causes an aggravation of that condition. Unfortunately, Adele Frawley did not have that condition. She might have remembered the day, shortly before Sherry cut her hand, that she had dropped a full box of Easy Gel tablets into the Mangler by accident. But she was dead, unaware that the active ingredient which soothed her heartburn was a chemical derivative of belladonna, known quaintly in some European countries as the Hand of Glory. There was a sudden, ghastly burping noise in the spectral silence of the blue ribbon laundry. A bat fluttered madly for its hole in the insulation above the dryers where it had roosted, wrapping wings around its blind face. It was a noise almost like a chuckle. The Mangler began to run with a sudden lurching grind, belts hurrying through the darkness, cogs meeting and meshing and grinding, heavy pulverizing rollers rotating on and on. It was ready for them. Now Hunter and Jackson meet that night, after midnight. Nothing good happens after midnight when you're dealing with entities. Why they don't do it in the daylight? And as they arrive at the laundry, they can hear the machine going. And they're scared. If they're terrified, in fact. And why they'd go to do it in the first place, I don't know. And they go in using the key that the inspector Roger has slipped Hunton earlier. He kind of knows what they're doing but doesn't want to be involved in any capacity. And as soon as they go in and switch on the lights, the Mangler shuts down. And Hunton turns to Jackson and again says, "Are you sure? Are you sure that there is no Hand of Glory, there's no belladonna in this? Are you sure that it is what you say it is?" And Jackson, of course, says, "Of course I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure 100%. I've done all this research for half a day on voodoo. And Jackson is confident, and they begin the ritual of exorcism, which at first seems to be working really, really well. It seems to be doing everything that they think it should be. The Bible verses, the holy water, it steams and it doesn't really like it, but it's mere seconds of doing this that Hunton's sort of, I want to say cop instincts kind of switch on, that things are really not going well. It's not really doing what it should be doing. There's something wrong. And he seems to think he's watching the Mangler, he's putting the holy water on, and Jackson's reciting the Bible verses, I think from Leviticus. And he gets the impression that whatever entity is in the Mangler is playing with them. Much like a cat does when they've pounced on something and they're not really hungry. They sort of bat it about a bit, sort of act like they don't want it, then pounce on it again, and it's giving those sort of vibes. And it's when Hunton puts the wafer of the host onto the conveyor belt that everything goes to shit. And I'll read you what happens, because this is, again, one of my favourite bits. Jackson looked at the Mangler and screamed. It was trying to pull itself out of the concrete like a dinosaur trying to escape a tar pit, and it wasn't precisely an ironer anymore. It was still changing, melting. The 550-volt cable fell, spitting blue fire into the rollers, and was chewed away. For a moment, 2 fireballs glared at them like lambent eyes filled with great and cold hunger. Another fault line tore open. The Mangler leaned toward them, within an ace of being free in the concrete moorings that held it. It leered at them. The safety bar had slammed up, and what Hunton saw was a gaping, hungry mouth filled with steam. They turned to run, and another fissure opened at their feet. Behind them, a great screaming roar as the thing came free. Hunton leaped over, but Jackson stumbled and fell sprawling. Hunton turned to help, and a huge amorphous shadow fell over him, blocking the fluorescence. It stood over Jackson, who lay on his back, staring up in a silent rictus of terror, the perfect sacrifice. Hunton had only a confused impression of something black and moving that bulked to a tremendous height above them both. Something with glaring electric eyes the size of footballs, an open mouth with a moving canvas tongue. He ran. Jackson's dying scream followed him. Now, Hunton escapes the Blue Ribbon Laundry and he runs directly to Roger Martin's house, the guy who was the inspector. And he bangs and bangs on the door, bearing in mind this is like 1 o'clock in the morning. He comes down, lets him in, and he doesn't recognise him. His eyes are bulging and his hair is completely white. Roger sits him down and tries to find out what exactly has happened, and Hunton is spluttering, he can't really get his words out. He just says he sputters out that Jackson is dead and they got it wrong. And that, oh my God, don't let it get free. And then he faints dead away on the floor. And Roger hightails it to the telephone, hoping that he can do something in time. But I mean, what are they going to do? What are they going to do, really? Seriously? Ring the police and say that there's a mad Mangler on the loose? But he goes to the phone and he hopes that it hasn't gotten out of the laundry yet, that it is still contained. But as he puts the telephone to his ear, he can hear in the distance a steady, grinding clatter, gradually getting louder. Something in the streets that is hot and steaming. And he ends up putting the phone down thinking, oh shit, it's out. And that's where the story ends. And if you hadn't gathered already, this is one of my favourite short stories, at least in this collection. Probably quite a lot of the other ones. It's way up there for me. I love the presentation of it. I love the imagery of it. I can see in my head a cast iron machine just gnawing people and gnashing people and squidging them alive. I can imagine all that and I love it. And I think part of what does the imagery so well in this book is because King, before he got his big break being famous, one of the jobs he worked to get by with his family was at an industrial laundry. He worked in a building that had this machine in, and thus the idea was born. It's like when you look at things and think, they're a bit, imagine if that thing was bad. And I like that, because it has a sense of, I want to say reality to it, but it has that thread running through it. And for me, the ending of this is just forebodingly perfect. I like that most of Stephen King's books, either the ending is awful or it doesn't necessarily have one. And I like the stories that don't necessarily have a shut-off ending to them. It leaves you to have your imagination to go on with the story and imagine all sorts. And I love it. Now for a fun fact. As I said, most of King's works are intertwined in some way. If it isn't the Dark Tower multiverse, it is different snippets or different locations that are all in the same thing. And the Blue Ribbon Laundry itself pops up in at least 2 more of King's stories. The first one, it is in Carrie. It is where Carrie's mother works. And it actually says that Carrie's mother works at the Blue Ribbon Laundry on the speed ironer and folder. And the laundry pops up again in the story Roadwork, when he was writing as Richard Bachman. Because the main character in that, I think it's George Dawes, is a middle manager at the Blue Ribbon Laundry. So I like little, I want to say Easter eggs, but I like little snippets of the universe like that. And of course, this story, like many of King's stories, has been adapted for film. Plus, some extremely questionable sequels, such as The Mangler 2 and The Mangler Reborn. I wish I was making that up, but I'm not. And like many of the stories that have been adapted into films, it ends up being pulp crap. I've only seen the trailer and it looks like pulp crap. So I definitely won't be watching the extremely questionable sequels at all. But if you've seen the film or if you've read the book, please share your thoughts down below and tell me what your favourite King short story is, or if you've read Night Shift, what your favourite one is out of that one. And as always, keep reading.